They wheeled me down the corridor just after noon, the walls of the hospital humming with quiet chaos, soft beeps, muffled shoes, the occasional laugh from a nurse's station. I clutched the thin blanket draped over my lap, not for warmth, but for a sense of security. My bones still ached from the operation, and despite the painkillers dulling the edges, I felt each jolt of the wheelchair like a whisper against my spine. The nurse smiled gently, asked if I was excited to go home. I nodded, but the answer was more complicated than that. Jeremy was already waiting by the sliding doors, standing stiffly in a slate gray coat, scrolling his phone with military precision. His car, a polished black Range Rover, gleamed under the weak sun. He didn't look up until the nurse announced me. "This is your mother?" she asked cheerfully. Jeremy slid his phone into his coat pocket and offered the faintest nod. "She has nowhere else to go," he said flatly. I caught the flicker in the nurse's expression, just for a second, then gone. That sentence, 6 little words, splintered something inside me. It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it, like he'd inherited a burden instead of receiving a mother. The nurse helped me into the passenger seat. Jeremy stayed silent as I settled in, then closed the door harder than he needed to. We drove mostly in silence. He asked if I had everything from the hospital, not out of concern, but as though checking off a task list. When I tried to say I'd like to stop for coffee, real coffee, not the bitter stuff from the hospital cafeteria, he responded with a clipped, "We have everything at home." Home. That word felt foreign. I didn't know where it pointed anymore. His house was tucked into one of those tidy suburban enclaves with recycled names like Meadow Brook or Willow Hill. Every lawn trimmed to code, every mailbox shiny. His driveway was edged with perfectly placed stones and a smart home security sign. I was already exhausted, but I made myself smile when his wife, Corinne, opened the door. She greeted me with a too bright smile and soft arms that didn't really embrace. Her perfume was sharp, her eyes darting to Jeremy before landing on me. "We're so glad you're here," she said. I told her she had a lovely home. It felt like the kind of thing I was supposed to say. Inside, everything was beige and glass, walls decorated with symmetrical frames, not a photo out of place. Their daughter Skylar, 16, offered a polite, "Hi, Grandma," and disappeared up the staircase without waiting for a response. I didn't blame her. Teenagers were slippery, their world not built for the old or fragile. They guided me, gently but firmly, down a flight of stairs to the basement. "It's quieter down here," Jeremy said. "You'll rest better." The basement was spacious but cold, sterile. There was a bed, a recliner, a small kitchenette. The windows were narrow slits near the ceiling, filtering in weak daylight. There was a camera on the wall facing the hallway. "Just for security," Jeremy said. "Don't worry about it." I didn't ask if it was necessary. I just sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the echo of my breathing. There was something chilling about the cleanliness of the place. Not comfort clean, but showroom clean. The kind of space no one really lived in. A hotel room where feelings weren't welcome. My bag was placed neatly on the dresser. A bottle of water waited on the nightstand. Corinne said dinner would be brought down later, and then they both left. I was alone. My fingers trembled as I reached for my sweater. The scars from surgery tugged beneath the bandages. The room was silent. No ticking clock, no footsteps above. Just the hum of ventilation and the camera's quiet blink. The first night passed slowly. I couldn't sleep. My body was tired, but my mind raced, memories rolling like tides. I kept thinking about what Jeremy said at the hospital. She has nowhere else to go. Was that all I'd become? I raised him, gave him baths, packed his lunches, sat through every piano recital. I stayed in a loveless marriage so he could grow up with stability. At least that's what I told myself back then. His father, Calvin, had his ways. Jeremy learned from him. Quiet commands, expectations enforced with cold glances, and the threat of disappointment. Somewhere along the line, Jeremy had traded affection for control. The next morning, Jeremy came down at 8 sharp. "Breakfast is upstairs, but I'll bring you something down here. You shouldn't be moving much." He placed a plate on the table without asking what I wanted. Toast, dry, an egg, rubbery, a banana, too ripe. I thanked him anyway. He stared at the camera before speaking. If you need anything, press this button. But try not to overuse it. We all have routines here. I nodded. I didn't say I'd raised a man who thought routines mattered more than people. Corinne brought me dinner that evening. Grilled chicken, steamed vegetables, no salt. We're watching your sodium now, she said, offering a stiff smile. I saw it again. The tension in her shoulders. The way she flinched when Jeremy called from upstairs. Her kindness felt rehearsed. Practiced. Skylar didn't come down again. Each day blurred into the next. I counted ceiling tiles. Watched shadows change on the walls. I took slow walks up the stairs when no one was home, just to hear my feet against something besides silence. The door at the top was always unlocked, but I never stayed long. I didn't feel welcome. There were no family photos on the walls, just landscapes, abstracts. Even in the living room, there were no signs of warmth. No baby pictures, no messy drawings from a younger Skylar. Everything looked staged. One afternoon, I tried to talk to Corinne while she brought in laundry. I asked about her work. She said she used to be in marketing. Used to be. Now she managed the home. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. She folded towels with military precision. Jeremy came home early that day. She jumped when the garage door opened. There it was again. That look. That fear. I began to wonder if I'd ever truly seen Jeremy, or if I'd only seen what I wanted to. The house was beautiful, clean, quiet, but I felt like a ghost drifting through someone else's curated life. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the blinking red light from the hallway camera. I thought about how quickly things had changed. 1 week ago, I was in a hospital bed, vulnerable, but hopeful. I thought my son would care for me, not just manage me. Now I realized I wasn't being cared for. I was being stored. I thought about my mother, who never left her abusive husband because good women stay. I thought about how I told myself Calvin was a good man having bad days. I thought about how Jeremy had learned all the wrong things from both of us. And I wondered if it was too late to learn something new myself. Because this didn't feel like home. This felt like exile. And something inside me, something long buried under years of silence and sacrifice, began to stir. It wasn't rage. Not yet. But it was close. I've been here 6 days, though each morning arrives with the same dull ache of repetition. There's no sense of time down here, no bird song, no shifting light, only the mechanical breath of the HVAC system and the ever-blinking red eye of the hallway camera. My world has narrowed to 4 beige walls, a twin bed with an orthopedic mattress, and whatever meals Jeremy decides are appropriate for me. He comes downstairs each morning like a foreman inspecting a job site. His questions are precise, emotionless. Did you sleep? Did you take your meds? How's the incision? He never asks how I feel. When I mention the bruising near my hip, he cuts me off. I'll handle it. Don't start overthinking. That's how things spiral. Corinne follows shortly after, a silent courier. She sets a tray on the side table. Oatmeal with skim milk, a hard-boiled egg, black coffee in a thermos with a plastic lid. Thank you, I say. She nods, never quite meeting my eyes. On day 4, I asked if I could use the landline upstairs. Mine was still dead after I dropped it at the hospital. Jeremy was already on it. I canceled your cell. No need for 2 lines right now. You're resting. You can use mine if it's important. He said this while removing the wall charger from my nightstand. He took the charger but left the phone, a gesture both petty and deliberate. I almost asked for it back, then stopped myself. I remembered this script. I'd read it before. It was how his father used to operate. Calvin always claimed control in the name of care. He'd say, "You don't need that extra grocery run," while inspecting my receipts, or "Let me handle the taxes. It's too complicated for you." And just like Jeremy, he'd smile while saying it, as though generosity came with fine print. The echo of Calvin's voice in Jeremy's words is almost too much to bear. The timbre may be different. Jeremy's is slicker, cooler. But the message is the same. You are not to be trusted. Not even with your own life. There's something humiliating about having your preferences erased. I asked for a different brand of soap. The floral scent makes me nauseous post-op. Jeremy said it's what they already use and not to complicate things. I suggested turning the basement into something more homey. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," he replied. "This isn't permanent, but it feels permanent. The camera outside the basement door is the worst of it. Just for safety," he said, with a smile that never touched his eyes. It faces the hallway, not the stairs. Not an area where I could actually fall, but where I could leave. Skylar came down once, halfway through the week. She hovered in the doorway, phone in hand, awkward and restless. "Hey, Grandma," she muttered. I invited her in. She glanced toward the camera and shook her head. "I've got a call in 5. I didn't ask who it was with. I knew it didn't matter. Teenagers are so skilled at disappearing without leaving the room. She used to be different. She used to hug me with both arms, braid my hair with little plastic clips. Now she acts like I'm something that might glitch if she touches it. Corinne pretends I'm fragile. Jeremy treats me like I'm a burden, and Skylar watches me like I'm a ghost. This house? It looks like a page from a lifestyle magazine. Open concept, granite countertops, gray accents everywhere. There's a silence here that doesn't feel peaceful. It feels strategic. Like sound is an intruder they've barricaded the doors against. Everything has a place. Nothing has a soul. Yesterday, while Corinne dropped off fresh linens, I asked her if she was happy. It slipped out. I hadn't meant to be direct. She blinked, then looked away. "Of course," she said, but her fingers gripped the laundry basket like it might float away. I saw it then, the faint tremor in her wrist, the stiffness in her smile. Calvin used to make me smile like that in public. The kind of smile that said I'm okay but screamed, "Get me out." After she left, I opened a drawer and found an old notebook Jeremy had used during college, half filled with class notes, the rest blank. I claimed the empty pages. I needed something that belonged only to me. I began journaling again. Not pretty sentences, not tidy reflections, just truths, scratched in ink, hard and raw. I wrote about the hospital, about what Jeremy said. She has nowhere else to go. I wrote it 10 times. Each time it felt different. Each time it felt more like a challenge than a sentence. I wrote about Calvin, about how I stayed when I should have run, about the nights he slammed doors just to hear me flinch, about the apologies that came with jewelry, never with change. I wrote about myself, or the version of me I'd buried, the girl who wanted to be a music teacher, the woman who never took up space, the mother who thought love meant sacrifice. I wrote until my fingers ached. And then, on the 6th evening, I found the tablet. It was lying on the small bookshelf near the stairwell, a generation-old iPad, probably Skylar's at one point. The screen was dim, but it powered on. No password, just a lock screen with a flower. Curious, I tapped into the voice memo app. A few recordings, mostly labeled with numbers. The last one, Jeremy Thurs 9:17 p.m. I pressed play. His voice filled the room, clearer than I expected. "She thinks she's still sharp," he said, followed by a low chuckle. "It's sad, really. I mean, she's harmless, but God. It's like babysitting a senile parasite." Corinne's voice answered, faint, unsure. "Maybe she just needs time. She's healing, Jeremy." "She's delusional," he snapped. "If she tries to pull anything, I'll call the state. Let her rot in a group home." I stopped the recording. My hand was trembling. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there. The words didn't surprise me. Not really. But hearing them out loud, without filters, without the performance, was something else. A slap made of syllables. He saw me not as a person, but a problem, a parasite, and he was willing to throw me away. The irony was brutal. I'd spent my entire life preserving the illusion of family, cleaning up after Calvin's messes, softening his sharpness for Jeremy's sake. And now, that son saw me as clutter. I placed the tablet back exactly where I found it, untouched. I wanted him to wonder. That night, I didn't sleep. I turned off the lamp and sat in the dark, the red blink of the hallway camera searing into my vision. I felt something shift inside me. A weight move, a silence crack. This wasn't care, this wasn't love, this was a system, a trap, and I'd lived in it too long. The days stretched out like pages in an old book, faded, stiff, and familiar. The silence that once unnerved me had become something else entirely. Not peace, not comfort, but space. Space to remember, space to reckon. I began writing more. Not just about Jeremy or the house or even the sting of his words from that audio file. No, something deeper began to leak out of me. Memories I hadn't touched in years, maybe decades. Each time the pen touched paper, it dragged pieces of my past behind it, leaving trails of old voices, colder winters, and the way my mother's hand would tremble when my father raised his voice. I grew up in Indiana, a farmhouse town in the late 60s, early 70s, where women were expected to serve quietly and disappear gently. My mother, Ruth, lived by a creed she never questioned: obey, endure, and never speak against your husband, no matter what he did. She never used the word abuse. She called it God testing her patience. My father, Robert, was a man of the church and the bottle. He quoted scripture when he was sober and slammed doors when he wasn't. He didn't beat us, not with fists anyway. He used silence, guilt, humiliation. That was enough to shape me. When I turned 16, I told my mother I wanted to teach music. I had a voice once, clear and bright. I sang solos in the church choir, led youth groups in hymnals. I told her I wanted to go to college. She smiled, patted my hand, and said, "Dreams are for girls who can afford to be selfish." That sentence buried itself in me. By 19, I had stopped singing. By 21, I had married Calvin Quinn. I met him at a gas station on a humid July afternoon. He offered to pay for my soda when I came up short. He was charming, dressed sharp, drove a Mercury Cougar with chrome rims. He opened doors and tipped his hat to waitresses. But the charm had a shelf life. By our second year of marriage, I was walking on glass. Calvin didn't hit. He didn't have to. He corrected. With words, with disapproval, with silence that lasted days. He called it structure. He said I was too emotional, too soft, too eager to please strangers. By our fourth year, I was pregnant with Jeremy. Calvin was pleased. A son. Someone to carry his name. I thought maybe a baby would soften him. It didn't. It just gave him someone else to mold. Jeremy was a quiet child, rarely cried, obeyed quickly, too quickly. I remember once when he was 5, I spilled soup on the counter. Calvin muttered, "You really can't manage a simple meal." Jeremy didn't look up from his toy truck. He just whispered, "She didn't mean to, Daddy." Calvin turned to him, kneeled down and said, "We don't make excuses in this house, right, son?" Jeremy nodded. By 10, he was already wearing Calvin's scowl. By 14, he'd stopped hugging me altogether. By 16, he told me I was too sensitive when I asked why he didn't come home for dinner anymore. I didn't fight back. I never had. I baked cookies. I ironed his shirts. I showed up to parent-teacher conferences with a quiet smile, even when the teachers said he lacked empathy or refused to work with others. They thought he was troubled. I thought he was surviving the only way he knew how. Now I see it clearly. He wasn't surviving. He was becoming. Calvin died of a heart attack on our 31st anniversary. I didn't cry at the funeral. I sat in the front pew, hands folded, eyes dry. Everyone assumed I was numb with grief, but I felt lighter than I had in years. Jeremy gave the eulogy. He called Calvin a strong, principled man. I wanted to laugh, but I stayed silent. Even in death, Calvin controlled the room. I spent the next 5 years convincing myself I was free. I painted the kitchen a soft blue, replaced the heavy curtains with gauze ones that let the sun in. I went to church less. I started walking each morning. I sang in the house again, low and shy, but I never rebuilt the parts of me that were razed. I didn't know how. And more importantly, I didn't know that freedom without healing isn't freedom. It's just a prettier kind of cage. Jeremy visited every other month, brought groceries, checked my medications, reorganized the cabinets for efficiency. I mistook it for care. I see now it was assessment, inventory. He was measuring how much of me was left, how much was still useful. And when I was discharged from the hospital last week, he decided I wasn't useful anymore. I reread what I've written so far in this journal. Patterns are beginning to form, not just in my memories, but in the lineage of silence passed from my mother to me and from me to Jeremy. I taught him, without meaning to, that women endure, that men lead, that discomfort is love, and control is protection. I passed him the blueprint, not through words, but through surrender. That realization made me nauseous. It also made me determined. This isn't just about what Calvin did to me, it's about what I allowed, about what I absorbed and passed on. I raised Jeremy to be his father's son because I didn't know how to be anything but his father's wife. But now, alone in this basement, I've started peeling back the layers. I see the bruises in the mirror, not just from the surgery, but the ones left from years of emotional kneeling. I'm beginning to see who I might have been, before Calvin, before Robert, before Jeremy. My mother didn't journal. She prayed. And when prayer didn't change her life, she blamed herself. I don't blame myself anymore. I blame the silence that covered abuse like a bandage, the silence that taught me to keep my voice low and my needs lower, the silence that said, "You stay, you endure, you survive." I don't want to survive anymore. I want to live. And I want Jeremy to see what it looks like when a woman reclaims the voice she buried to keep his father calm. Because this story doesn't end in this basement. Not anymore. The sound came after midnight, a quiet, tentative knock on the basement door. I had just closed my journal, my pen still resting between the pages like a pressed flower. The room was dark except for the glow of the hallway nightlight, casting a soft amber wash across the floor. "Margaret?" Corinne's voice, software unsure. I sat up, heart ticking faster than usual. "Come in," I whispered. She slipped inside, closing the door behind her with a slowness that told me she wasn't supposed to be here. Her robe hung loosely off her shoulders, and her bare feet made no sound against the tile. Her eyes were wide and glassy, like someone halfway between a confession and a breakdown. "I'm sorry," she said. I blinked. "For what?" She looked down. "For all of it." The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was sacred, the kind that doesn't need to be filled. She sat on the edge of the chair across from my bed, her posture tense, hands twisting the sash of her robe. "I heard him," she said after a moment. "The recording. On the tablet I didn't ask how. I didn't need to." She exhaled, long and hollow. "He was cruel. I know it's not the first time, but hearing it, it's different when you hear it." I nodded slowly. "It is." She looked up then. "I'm not allowed access to our accounts. I can't buy groceries without permission. He checks the receipts. He tracks what I eat, sometimes even what I wear. Skylar thinks I'm weak." I felt the breath catch in my throat. "You're not." Her laugh was brittle. "I haven't seen a therapist in 3 years. He says it's a waste of money, that people used to cope just fine without dumping their problems on strangers." The words echoed something I'd once heard Calvin say, and before him, my own father. "I know what that cage feels like," I whispered. "It has pretty wallpaper, but it's still a cage." Corinne looked around the basement. "I think he's building one for Skylar too, just quieter, tighter." She was trembling now. I reached out and placed my hand gently over hers. "I stayed with Calvin because I thought keeping the peace was the same as protecting Jeremy," I said. "But I didn't protect him. I taught him." She met my gaze. The tears in her eyes didn't fall, but I saw them waiting. "I don't want Skylar to learn this version of love." The shadows on the wall stretched like fingers as the hallway light dimmed behind the door. The house creaked faintly above us. I could almost hear the weight of Jeremy's footsteps in the carpeted silence. Corinne stood up abruptly. "I shouldn't be here. If he wakes up." I understood. She reached the door, then paused. "Your journal, do you write about everything?" she asked. "Everything I was too afraid to say out loud," I replied. She nodded. "Keep writing." Then she was gone. I sat in the quiet, the shadows still dancing, and let the silence settle into something warmer. Not peace, but purpose. The next morning I left a note folded under the rim of her teacup. Just one line. "You are not alone." She didn't say anything when she found it, but the next day, I found a chocolate square tucked into my linen drawer, my favorite kind. The kind Jeremy always said had too many calories. Each day we exchanged quiet affirmations, a hand-squeezed lemon in my tea, a slip of paper with a quote from Audre Lorde. "Your silence will not protect you." We said nothing about them aloud, not even in whispers. This was how women survived in cages, by hiding light in small, defiant corners. Skylar remained a distant orbit. She came down occasionally, hovering near the door, eyes flicking from the camera to me and back again. I never pressed. She was watching, absorbing. One morning, she asked if I'd always kept journals. I said yes. She didn't say anything else, just nodded and left. But the look in her eyes lingered. It was later that week, maybe 2 days after that conversation, when I heard the yelling. Not raised voices, not tension, actual yelling. From upstairs, sharp, violent. Then a sound like glass breaking, followed by silence. I tried to stand, but my legs were slow to respond. I made it to the bottom of the stairs, heart pounding when Corinne came rushing down, panic and rage painting her face in equal measure. "It's Skylar," she said. "He hit her." My knees buckled against the rail. "She found your journal," Corinne explained breathlessly. "She was reading it. Jeremy caught her. She said he's just like Calvin. She used that name, Calvin. He slapped her across the face." I felt the oxygen vanish from the room. "She locked herself in her room. I think she's okay, but God, Margaret." Corinne sat beside me on the stair, shaking. "She's seeing it now, she knows. And he knows she knows." I felt the stirrings of something I hadn't touched in decades. Not fear. Fire. That journal wasn't just mine anymore. It had become a mirror, a signal flare. And Skylar, bless her fire, had held it up. I looked at Corinne, and for the first time, I saw not just a woman who was afraid, but a woman who was done. Something had cracked open in this house. The silence was no longer a shield. It had become a weapon, and it was turning on him. I hadn't moved that fast in years. The pain in my hip shrieked with each step as I climbed the stairs. But I didn't stop. Not even when the railing bit into my palm. Not even when my vision blurred with rage. Skylar, he'd hit her. I didn't need to see the bruise. I didn't need Corinne to explain it again. The look in her eyes when she said those words, "He hit her," told me everything. That was the spark. And it found kindling in every scar I'd ever hidden. Jeremy was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, phone pressed to his ear. His expression was blank, as though nothing had happened. As though he wasn't standing in the crater he'd made. He turned when he saw me. Surprise, then annoyance. "Mom, you shouldn't be up here." I ignored him. "You hit her." "She's exaggerating," he said without a pause, lowering the phone slowly. "She's a teenager, emotional, overreacting. She has a handprint on her face." He shrugged. "You're all stirring each other up. Skylar's rebelling. Corinne's been unstable for years. And you're turning this house into a circus." My voice shook. "She's a child." "No," he snapped. "She's my child, and you don't get to come into my home and undermine me." I stepped closer, eyes locked on his. "Your home? I spent my whole life making homes for people who never asked if I belonged in them." He exhaled sharply, stepping back. "You're not well. I've been patient, but this is becoming dangerous." There it was, the shift. That same tone Calvin used when I spoke out of turn. The one that slipped from worry into control. From "are you okay?" to "you're not thinking clearly." "You know what?" Jeremy said, voice lowering. "Maybe it's time we looked into assisted living. You're clearly overwhelmed. I've been talking to a few facilities." My hands went cold. My stomach dropped. A facility. He was going to lock me away. I didn't speak. Not at first. I watched his face, watched the way he tightened his jaw like a warning, like Calvin used to. And for the first time in my life, I didn't flinch. I didn't shrink. I laughed. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't soft. It was raw and jagged, and it came from someplace so deep I almost didn't recognize it. "You want to put me away?" I said, my voice loud and unfamiliar. "Because I told you the truth?" Jeremy stepped forward. "Lower your voice." "Why? Are you afraid Skylar might hear it?" That stopped him. "I stayed silent for 50 years, I said. "I swallowed every insult, every threat, every lie your father fed me. And then I swallowed yours too. But not anymore." Jeremy's mouth twisted. "You're delusional." "No," I said. "I'm finally awake." Corinne stood frozen at the hallway's edge, her hand on Skylar's bedroom door. Her eyes were wide, but she didn't move. She didn't stop me. She didn't need to. Because in that moment, I realized I wasn't just fighting for Skylar. I was fighting for me. I turned and walked back down the stairs, my hip burning, my vision tunneling, back to the basement, to the only room in this house not claimed by him. The door shut behind me like a promise. I sat at my desk, took out my journal, and opened to a fresh page. And I began to plan. Not with rage, not with impulse, with clarity. A silent coup. I would reclaim my body, my name, my power. I would undo what I had taught. I would break the chain my mother wrapped around my wrists that I had passed unwittingly to my son. My hands were shaking, not with fear, with energy. I remembered my mother's last words to me, whispered just before the morphine took her for good. I should have left him when I had the chance. That was her legacy, regret. And it was the only inheritance I'd ever accepted without question. Until now. That night, I slept with my journal clutched to my chest. The pain in my body was nothing compared to the flame in my chest. And I knew, without question, that something had shifted. Jeremy had all the keys, but I just found the door. I found the lockbox on a rainy Tuesday, tucked in the back of the upstairs storage closet, buried beneath a stack of Christmas wreaths and forgotten board games. The house was unusually quiet. Jeremy at work, Skylar at school, Corinne somewhere between alert and avoidance. I'd come upstairs to find an old photo album, something familiar, something mine. Instead, I found a battered cedar box, edges worn, a rusted latch holding its secrets inside. The key was taped beneath it, nearly crumbling when I peeled it free. I didn't open it right away. I took it downstairs like it might fall apart in my hands. Set it on the desk beside my journal. It sat there all afternoon, as though waiting to be acknowledged. When I finally lifted the lid, the scent of old paper and time escaped in a quiet exhale. Inside were photos, dozens of them, me young and smiling beside Calvin, Jeremy gap-toothed, holding a baseball glove, birthday parties, Easters. Then, strange ones, women I didn't recognize. A girl, maybe 7, blowing out candles on a cake with Lena, scrawled in red icing. Tucked beneath the photos was a stack of envelopes, yellowed and carefully bound in twine. Letters. The top one bore my name. Margaret, in case you ever find this. My hands went cold. The handwriting wasn't Calvin's. It was delicate, looping, feminine. I unfolded it slowly. The ink had bled slightly from age, but the words were intact. I loved him too. I didn't know he was married when we met. By the time I did, I was pregnant. He promised he would leave you. He didn't. But he sent money. Every month. He said you were sick, that you wouldn't survive without him, that your son needed stability. I believed him. I never meant to hurt you. He lied to both of us. I kept every check, every letter. I only stopped writing when he died. I never hated you, Margaret. I just wanted a father for my daughter. There was no signature. I sat for a long time, reading and rereading the words until they blurred into symbols. All those years, all those questions. Why Calvin disappeared for weekends. Why Jeremy's college fund was untouched by our finances. Why the man I married never looked me in the eyes after 1991. It wasn't my fault. It had never been my fault. I had spent 3 decades believing I wasn't enough, that my silence made him distant, that my body, failing to conceive after Jeremy, had driven him away. I told myself stories to survive, bent the truth until it fit into the tiny container I was allowed to live in. But the truth wasn't a small box. It was a fire. When Corinne returned that evening, I showed her the letter. Her reaction was immediate. Tears, gasps, hands pressed over her mouth like she was holding in a scream. I know this woman, she said quietly. I saw her name once on a bank receipt when I was organizing taxes for Jeremy. I thought it was a relative. She isn't, I said. She's the mother of his half-sister. Corinne sat beside me, stunned. That's where Jeremy's tuition came from. Calvin told him not to ask questions, just to take the money. He told me it was a scholarship. God, Margaret. I didn't cry. Not then. Because something far bigger than grief had settled over me. Clarity. Jeremy's entire life, his education, his confidence, his certainty, was built on betrayal. He was raised on hush money, groomed on secrecy. He hadn't just mimicked his father, he'd profited from him. The man who spoke to nurses like I was baggage was himself the product of deceit, and he didn't even know it. But I did. I burned the letter. Not in rage, in ceremony. I tore each envelope, each photograph, excluding the one of the little girl with the red iced cake, and carried them out to the backyard fire pit. The rain had stopped. The clouds hung low and gray like judgment. I knelt beside the pit, fed the flames one secret at a time. I watched the paper curl and blacken, the ink vanish, the lies dissolve into smoke. This wasn't erasure, it was release. I kept the photo of Lena. Something in her eyes reminded me of Skylar. The next day, I received a call, an unfamiliar number. I answered on instinct. Mrs. Quinn? The voice asked. Male, professional. Yes. My name is Charles Leverett. I'm an attorney with Norwood and Keene. I represent the estate of Angela Worth. Your name has come up in relation to a trust. I believe you knew Mr. Calvin Quinn? My heart thudded once, heavy. Yes, there's a trust fund, he said. Angela's daughter passed away 3 years ago. In her final will, she left instructions to transfer all remaining assets to you. We've attempted contact multiple times. It appears your husband arranged for the fund originally, though not under transparent terms. I sat down. I don't understand, I said. It's yours, Mrs. Quinn. Fully. The documents will be sent for review, but I can assure you the funds are considerable. My fingers trembled around the receiver. Why? Why would she do that? I think, he said gently, she believed you were owed the truth, and something more than just truth. After we ended the call, I sat at the desk, staring at the burned remnants in the fire pit just beyond the basement window. I had no words, only breath, only a thundering heartbeat and the slow, pulsing certainty that everything I thought I knew had been remade. Calvin was gone. His lies were ash. Jeremy was standing on a pedestal made from a broken foundation. And I was standing too. But for the first time in my life, the ground beneath me wasn't made of someone else's choices. It was mine. The first letter wasn't planned. It came late one night, just after the house had gone quiet. I sat with my journal open, staring at the pages that had become both mirror and map. I thought about Skylar, her wide, watchful eyes, the bruise on her cheek that had faded but not vanished. I thought about how she looked at me now, not with fear, not with pity, but with something more dangerous. Curiosity, so I tore a fresh sheet from my notebook and began. Skylar, when I was your age, I wanted to be a teacher, a music teacher specifically. I loved the sound of a room just before the first note, how quiet it would get, how the air would tighten with possibility. Your grandfather thought it was a silly dream. He said, nobody pays women to play piano anymore. So I stopped dreaming. I want you to know that, because I don't want you to stop. I folded the page, placed it inside an old paperback I knew she liked, and left it just inside the door she always hovered near. The next morning, it was gone. She didn't mention it, didn't thank me. But that afternoon, she sat at the foot of my bed and asked, what song did you love most when you were a girl? It became a rhythm. Each night, I wrote another letter. Not all of them were sad. Some were funny, stories of birthday cakes dropped on the kitchen floor, of Jeremy wetting the bed and blaming the dog. Some were about my mother, some about Calvin, some about the silence that stretched between all the women I knew like thread passed down through generations. Skylar began coming down daily. She didn't always stay long. Sometimes she just curled in the recliner and scrolled her phone, but I knew she was reading. She always left with a letter tucked into her sleeve or hidden in the pages of her sketchbook. One day she brought her own notebook, black cover, spiral bound, blank. I want to try, she said. I didn't ask what. She sat beside me and began to write. She didn't show me, not at first, but I could see the tension in her shoulders ease as the pen moved across the page, like she was wringing out something heavy. That night I wrote, this is how we begin again. Not with revenge, but with records. Let them call it memory, or fiction, or hysteria. But we will call it truth. It felt like planting seeds. Within a week, we began to chart it. Our history, our her story. Skylar brought down a corkboard from the garage and pinned note cards to it. Names, dates, bits of memory. My mother, Ruth. Her mother, Eleanor. Eleanor's sister, Lottie, sent to an asylum at 22 for inappropriate laughter. Aunt Jeanette, divorced at 35, never seen again. My cousin Millie ran away with a saxophone player, found dead in Detroit in 74. Skylar stared at the names like they were constellations. How come we don't know their stories? She asked. Because no one thought they mattered, I said. Or worse, because someone made sure they didn't. She pinned the last card and stepped back. Then we'll make sure they do. We called it the Wall of Women. Some were blank. Some had only one word. Forgotten. But even that was a start. We filled the margins of our lives with names that hadn't been spoken in decades. We didn't always cry. Sometimes we laughed at the absurdity, at the patterns, at the realization that we were never alone in our struggle, only isolated in our silence. Skylar's writing changed. She stopped using neat lines, started crossing things out. scribbling, tearing out pages and taping them back together. It was messy, beautiful. "I hate him," she said one evening. We were both writing in silence. She hadn't looked up. "Your dad?" She nodded. "I hate how he talks to Mom. I hate how she flinches. I hate that I flinch. I hate that I didn't see it before." I reached over and placed my hand on hers. "You see it now," I said. "That's what matters." Skylar's grip tightened. "Does it ever stop hurting?" "No," I answered honestly, "but it stops owning you." That night she left her journal open on the recliner. A single line stared up from the page. "I think I'm more like you than I thought. And that scares me, but it also makes me proud. I didn't write that night. I didn't need to. The words had been passed. What began as my legacy of silence had become a legacy of truth. And truth, I realized, was a kind of weapon. Not the kind that wounds. The kind that opens locks. I wasn't trying to save Skylar. I was walking beside her as she saved herself. And maybe, somewhere between my letters and her lines, we were saving each other. Jeremy stood in the living room with the same expression he wore at his father's funeral. Controlled fury, masked as concern. "You've become unpredictable," he said. "I'm worried about your decision-making capacity." The words were cold, surgical. "I'm not incompetent," I said, keeping my voice level. He shrugged. "You're impulsive. You've been influencing Skylar, manipulating Corinne, writing nonsense. It's not healthy." He circled the kitchen island like a predator. "I spoke with a legal advisor," he added. "We may need to pursue conservatorship." There it was. The line he'd been inching toward for weeks. The final insult. He wanted legal dominion over me. My life, my body, my money. I watched his face as he said it, so calm, so sure. He thought I would bend. I didn't speak. I didn't argue. I just nodded slowly and turned back toward the stairs. That night, long after they'd gone to bed, I stood barefoot in the entryway, staring at the small wooden bowl that sat on the console table. It had been there for years, filled with keys, paper clips, stray pennies. I reached in and closed my fingers around the cold metal, the master keys. I pocketed them and crept back downstairs, heart steady, steps measured. I woke before the sun. There was a hush in the house, the kind that only comes before something breaks. I locked the back door, then the side. I secured every window. I double-checked the front, then placed a handwritten note against the glass in the center of the door. Not this time. The light was rising behind the trees when I heard the garage door open. Jeremy always jogged at sunrise, exactly 45 minutes, then home for protein and silence. This time, he returned to find the door locked, the note waiting. I watched from the kitchen window as he paused, squinting at the words. He tried the knob, rattled it, knocked once, then again, louder. Then came the yelling. "Open the door!" I didn't. "Mom, open the goddamn door!" I made tea. The sound of his fists against the wood echoed through the house, but it didn't touch me. I was on the phone with the lawyer, Mr. Leverett, the man who had called about the trust fund. "It's time," I said. "I'll initiate the transfer," he replied. "It will be active within the hour. And Mrs. Quinn, congratulations." I hung up. Corinne entered the kitchen slowly, eyes wide, still in her robe. Skylar followed, clutching her journal. "What did you do?" Corinne whispered. I looked at her. "I locked him out." She stared, then nodded. Skylar smiled. The sun had risen fully now, casting golden light through the windows. I walked to the front door, opened it just enough to stand framed in it. Jeremy stood on the porch, red-faced and panting. "You've lost your mind," he barked. "No," I said calmly. "I finally found it." Behind me, I heard Corinne's voice, small but firm. "She has the right. It's her house, too." "Not legally," Jeremy snapped. "She's a danger. You're both enabling her. This ends today." He reached for his phone. 20 minutes later, the police arrived. 2 officers, 1 male, 1 female. Jeremy met them with righteous indignation, arms waving, pointing toward the door like it was a crime scene. "She's mentally unstable. She locked me out of my own house. I want her removed." The officer stepped inside. "Ma'am, may we speak with you?" I nodded. "I'm Margaret Quinn," I said, voice steady. "This is my residence. I've not harmed anyone. I'm not a threat. I have full legal capacity." My attorney can confirm all documents related to recent changes in financial status and home ownership. The male officer glanced at his partner, who nodded. Anyone here corroborate your account? Corinne stepped forward. She's telling the truth. I saw everything. He threatened her. Skylar stood beside her. He hit me last week. The officers turned to Jeremy. Sir, we're going to need you to wait outside. He opened his mouth to argue, but stopped when Corinne handed them a folder. Inside, copies of the trust documentation, my medical records, photographs, a copy of Skylar's journal entry dated the night of the slap. Jeremy froze. For once he had no words. He was escorted to the porch, not in handcuffs, not arrested, just removed. But that was enough. When the door closed, Skylar burst into tears. Corinne wrapped her arms around her. I stood beside them both, back straight, breath slow. The keys were still in my pocket. I didn't let go. Not yet. Jeremy didn't go quietly. Even as the officers guided him back toward the sidewalk, he barked like a cornered dog. Accusations, denials, demands echoing across the cul-de-sac. This is a mistake. She's unstable. That's my daughter. His voice cracked with a kind of panic I hadn't seen in him before. Not when Calvin died. Not even when Skylar was born. This wasn't grief or anger. It was fear. The male officer spoke calmly, professionally, while his partner made notes. Jeremy's face reddened further, his arms flailing in protest. She's turning them all against me, he shouted. My own mother. I stood in the doorway watching. Corinne beside me. Skylar just behind, arms wrapped around my waist. She was crying again, but not from fear. This time it was something deeper. Release, maybe. Relief. A crowd had begun to form. Mrs. Lancaster from next door appeared on her porch in her robe, squinting toward the commotion. The Bennetts stood across the street with their dog, whispering. The windows of the Green household cracked open. It didn't take long for gossip to follow. And still, I did not hide. Corinne stepped forward, a manila folder clutched tightly in her hands. She passed it to the female officer without a word. Inside, audio recordings, including Jeremy's cruel laughter, his threats. Bank statements showing the withdrawals from Calvin's silent accounts, screenshots from the shared drive, hidden folders filled with manipulative budgeting plans and withheld therapy bills. Then something else. A spiral-bound journal, Corinne's. She'd written her truth, too. I had not asked her to, but she had done it anyway. Skylar buried her face against my side and sobbed. The officer nodded after reviewing the documents. We'll need to take a statement, and we'll be conducting an investigation into financial coercion and suspected assault. Jeremy's words faltered. His shoulders slumped. He looked around at the neighbors watching, people who had always seen him as a polished professional, a responsible husband, a loving father. Now they were seeing him differently. His protest turned to pleading. Mom, please, this is all a misunderstanding. You can fix this. I didn't answer. The officers led him to the car. No handcuffs? Not yet. But the click of the door locking him inside was louder than any metal could have been. The car pulled away. The sound faded, and silence returned. But not the old silence. Not the one filled with secrets and shame. This one was earned. This one was mine. Skylar's arms squeezed tighter around me. Her breath was hiccuped. It's really over? I didn't say yes. I said, it's really starting. Inside, the house felt different, lighter. The walls no longer pressed inward. The stairs no longer loomed. Even the camera in the hallway, still blinking, seemed powerless. I turned to Corinne. Her face was pale, but her eyes were steady. We're safe now, I said. She nodded, barely able to speak. I think I need to breathe for a while. Then breathe, I told her. Here, this is your home too. Later that evening, I stood at the front window, watching as more neighbors passed by. Some tried to make eye contact, some whispered behind coffee cups. Some stared, stunned, unsure how to reconcile what they'd seen with what they thought they knew. Let them talk, let them finally see. For so long, freedom felt like a private thing, something quiet, interior, without witness. But now I understood. Sometimes freedom has to shout, sometimes it has to pull the blinds open and let the world stare. Sometimes it demands noise and discomfort and confrontation. Freedom costs things. It cost me my son. And yet, even as I stood there, a small ache blooming in my chest, I felt no regret, only sorrow. Jeremy had been forged in the same fire that had almost burned me to ash. I had watched him become the man his father had trained him to be. I had let it happen, but I had also chosen to stop it. I was both the source and the solution. That paradox would live with me forever. I thought for a moment of packing my things, of leaving this house, selling it, retreating to a quiet corner of the world. But then I remembered what Skylar had said just 2 nights earlier, while taping another card to the wall of women. This house doesn't have to be haunted. She was right. This wasn't just a place of pain. It could be rebuilt. It could hold laughter and sunlight and music again. I stepped outside just before dusk, barefoot on the porch. The sky was streaked with orange and violet. The neighborhood had gone mostly still, the hush after a storm. A few doors down, a young girl rode her bike past the driveway. She smiled at me. I smiled back. Tomorrow I would start repainting the walls. I'd take down the camera, open every window. But tonight I would sit with Corinne and Skylar in the living room, with the lights on and no fear in our throats. And I would say it aloud. I am not ashamed. I am free. The first thing I did was open the blinds. For years they'd been drawn, casting the living room in a kind of museum light, dim, pristine, untouched. Jeremy liked it that way, said it kept the furniture from fading. I never realized until that moment how that reasoning extended beyond decor. Sunlight flooded in. The dust danced. The walls, once dull and cold, now glowed a soft gold. Corinne stood beside me, still in pajamas, holding a cup of tea. "It feels warmer already," she whispered. We started small, rearranged the furniture, moved the stiff-backed chairs away from the walls, added cushions, a blanket, a houseplant. Then we tackled the basement. Skylar insisted on painting. She chose a shade called Morning Fern. Not quite green, not quite blue. The walls went from sterile beige to something living, breathing. She blasted music from her phone as we painted. Nothing too loud, just enough to fill the space with motion. Corinne laughed when Skylar accidentally streaked her jeans. I accidentally dabbed a line of paint across Skylar's nose. She retaliated. It became a mess, a beautiful one. By the time we finished, there were fingerprints along the trim and paint stains on the floor. But I didn't mind. It felt earned, like history in the making. We opened every door that had once been kept locked. The closet in the upstairs hallway, the attic. Even the cabinet in the kitchen Jeremy always said was just junk. Inside, old candles, family photos, and a stack of letters Calvin had never mailed. I read one, then tossed the rest in the bin. We didn't need ghosts anymore. The house smelled different now, not just from the paint or the candles, but from life. We cooked together. We cried sometimes, unexpectedly, in quiet moments, but mostly we laughed. Skylar took over the old guest room and filled it with books and dried flowers and string lights she said made her feel like someone else lived here first and left the magic behind. Corinne began sketching again. She'd gone to art school before meeting Jeremy. I saw the drawings tucked between cookbooks, hands, birds, skylines, self-portraits, quietly fierce. I started baking again. Music on in the background, not hymns, Nina Simone, Joan Baez, voices that carried history and rage and beauty all at once. One Sunday, Skylar taped a new note card to the wall of women. This one had no name, just a sentence: "We're still here." That evening, Corinne suggested a storytelling night. "Invite some of the neighbors," she said. "Women, mothers, daughters, anyone who's ever been silenced." I hesitated. But then I remembered the faces that had watched from their windows as the police drove Jeremy away, curious, cautious. Maybe they weren't just gossiping. Maybe they were waiting for permission. So we printed invites. We called it The Room We Speak In. On the first night, 6 women came: Mrs. Lancaster, a young mother from down the street, a teacher, a nurse, a retired librarian. One brought her adult daughter who didn't speak but clutched a spiral notebook like it held her throat together. We set out chairs in a circle, lit candles, made tea. We didn't ask anyone to share. But slowly, the room filled with voices. Stories of marriages endured, careers abandoned, children raised in fear, hopes deferred, love rediscovered. When the librarian read aloud a letter she'd written to her 16-year-old self, Skylar squeezed my hand and whispered, "This is the best room in the house." Every week, more came. Soon every room had its own story. The dining room where we placed a large corkboard filled with photos and names and messages. The hallway lined with art prints and scribbled quotes. Even the bathroom had a poem tacked to the mirror, Schuyler's Favorite by Adrian Rich. The house became something else, not a monument to survival, but a sanctuary of truth. I caught myself one morning staring at the old photograph of me and Calvin that had once hung in the entryway. It was still there, but now it sat on a shelf among many others. Schuyler as a toddler, Corinne in college, me in choir robes at 15. I didn't take the photo down. I just let it be part of the full picture now. Not erased, not revered, just real. The flashbacks came less often. Sometimes, in the early morning when the house was quiet, I'd feel the ghost of Calvin's voice, or see Jeremy's shadow in the corner of my mind. But they passed like weather now, temporary, bearable. The living moments filled the space. Schuyler's laughter echoing down the hallway, Corinne humming while folding laundry, my own voice, reading out loud from a book of poetry, or singing along softly to records I hadn't played in decades. This was not the life I imagined when I was young, but it was the life I built. And the house? It didn't hold us hostage anymore. It held us together. The last page snuck up on me. It had become a ritual, pen in hand, quiet hour, the rhythm of memory becoming story. I hadn't noticed how much space I'd filled, how thick the ink had grown with honesty. And then, one morning, I turned the page and found none left. Just a blank cardboard flap and the quiet weight of everything I'd written. I ran my fingers over the spine, the soft, worn edges. This journal had held so much. My past, my pain, my truths, whispered into paper because I hadn't known how to speak them aloud. But it wasn't just a record. It had become a witness. I sat at the kitchen table, sunlight pooling across the wood, and opened the front cover. There, on the inside flap, I began to write, "Jeremy, you were my first miracle. I loved you before I ever held you. I shaped my life around yours, built my days to match your needs, softened my edges so you wouldn't feel the sharpness of this world too soon. And in doing so, I handed you the tools your father used on me. You didn't make yourself cruel. We did that together. Me by staying silent. Him by being loud. And you by learning from both. I don't hate you, but I don't excuse you either. You chose who you became. And now, I've chosen who I'll be. This is goodbye. Not because I stopped loving you, but because I finally started loving myself. Mom." I tore the letter out, folded it neatly, and placed it in the envelope I'd addressed weeks ago. It would sit in a drawer, sealed. If he came back, it would be waiting. If not, it would rest with me. Either way, it was out of me now. Schuyler found me on the porch that afternoon, journal still in my lap. "Finished?" she asked, sitting beside me. "For now," I said. She nodded, then reached into her backpack and pulled out a printed page. "I entered this in the district writing competition," she said. "They asked for nonfiction. I thought this counted." I took the page and read the title. "The Wall of Women, My Grandmother's Basement." I didn't speak as I read. Her voice rang clear in every line, raw, beautiful, unflinching. She didn't spare me, or herself. She described the bruise, the silence, the night I locked the door and chose us. When I looked up, she was watching me. "You told me stories could save people," she said. "I figured I should try." "They already have," I said. The next day I scanned the journal, every page. I sent the copy to a local women's shelter under a pseudonym. I didn't expect a reply. But one came, 2 weeks later. The director had read it. She said the staff cried. They wanted to use excerpts in their monthly newsletter. They wanted to build a writing workshop around the pages. They wanted me to teach it. I nearly said no. I told myself I was too old, too tired, too far removed from any version of teacher. But Schuyler just smiled and said, "You're still writing your second act." So I said yes. I didn't stand behind podiums or hand out lesson plans. I sat in circles, listened, shared, encouraged other women to pick up pens and bleed onto paper. We talked about power and silence and the thin line between the two. Some cried, some laughed. All of them wrote. I didn't read from my journal, not at first. But eventually I brought a few pages. The one about Ruth, the one about Calvin, the letter I never mailed. They listened. And after, they told me I wasn't alone. That was the greatest gift. Not being praised, being understood. The house stayed full. Corinne painted the hallway a warm cream and replaced every doorknob. Schuyler organized a neighborhood reading night and invited the same women who once whispered behind curtains. They came. We read stories. We shared soup. We stopped hiding. I bought a new journal last week, leather-bound, thick paper, heavy in the hand. The first page is still blank, not because I don't know what to write, but because I want to start it slow, with care, with intention. Because I know now you're never too old to begin again. My name is Margaret Quinn. I say it now, clearly, fully, without apology. Not Mom. Not Mrs. Calvin Quinn, not Grandma, though I still wear that one proudly. Just Margaret, just me. It took me 63 years to claim it out loud, not as a title, not as someone's appendage, but as a woman who made it through the fire and lived to name herself on the other side. I stood in the DMV with Corinne beside me, new glasses perched on my nose, a folder in my hand. My old ID was a relic, stiff-smiled, lifeless. A picture of a woman who blinked too often and spoke too little. A ghost in government ink. The woman behind the desk asked, "Any changes?" "Yes," I said. "I'm changing everything." A new address, a new bank account, a new photo. Not because I was hiding, but because I was done disappearing. I signed the forms with deliberate strokes. Margaret Quinn. It felt like opening a door and finding myself waiting on the other side. That summer I bought a cottage. It wasn't extravagant. 2 bedrooms, weathered siding, a small porch that leaned ever so slightly toward the lake. The roof needed work, the fence was half collapsed, and the dock had more splinters than nails. But it was mine. It was nestled near Laurel Ridge Lake, about an hour from the city. Far enough to feel free, close enough that Schuyler could visit without missing school. Corinne cried when I handed her the keys. "For weekends," I said. "For healing, for memory, for whatever we need it to be." We spent that first weekend painting the porch rails a soft sage green. Schuyler found an old canoe under a tarp and named it Second Wind. We toasted our progress with lemonade and burned sage by the fire pit. The scent clung to our clothes, and I didn't mind. There was no camera on the door, no voices yelling behind walls, just wind through trees, water lapping the shore, and the easy rhythm of women breathing in a space they built themselves. I sat on the dock the last morning, feet in the water, notebook in my lap. The sky was streaked in watercolor pastels, and for once, I didn't feel haunted. I felt held. I thought about Jeremy. I still do sometimes. Not with anger. Not even always with sadness. Some days I wonder where he is, what story he tells himself, if he ever reread the letter I left for him, if he understood it wasn't revenge, but release. I haven't seen him since the investigation closed. He avoided charges through a quiet settlement and a sealed agreement that I didn't contest. I didn't want courtrooms. I didn't want battles. I wanted peace. Real peace. I wanted distance. And now, I have it. The house back in the city has become something of a sanctuary. Corinne still lives there, running her own graphic design business from the converted guest room. Schuyler, now a senior, has already been offered early admission to 2 colleges, both with creative writing scholarships. Sometimes we meet there for dinner. Sometimes we retreat to the cottage. We laugh. We grieve. We live. Not every day is perfect. Some nights I still wake with the echoes of slammed doors in my ears. Some memories don't fade. They just soften around the edges. But they don't own me anymore. I own myself. At my discharge, he said I had nowhere else to go. He was wrong. I went home. If this story echoed somewhere deep inside you, don't let it stay silent. Pass it on. Share it with the one woman who needs to hear, you are not alone. Every voice raised breaks another chain, and every truth spoken makes it harder for silence to survive. This isn't just a story, it's a reckoning. Keep it alive.